Hi, my friend, and welcome back to the podcast. If you're a new listener, let me introduce myself. I'm Carmen. I'm an early childhood special education teacher, a certified life and performance coach, and I'm the host of this podcast, Authentically ADHD. I started this podcast because I was diagnosed late in life, and I learned very quickly that the medication that they handed me at the pharmacy would not teach me what having ADHD really meant. So I hyper focused on tons of research. That research turned into paper piles that I saved because I knew I needed them for something. I just didn't know what. Then one day I heard or read something motivational, and in true ADHD fashion, I literally impulsively started this podcast. Here, now, over 100 episodes later, I've now made it my goal to help as many ADHDers as I can to work with their brains instead of constantly fighting against it. Are you ready for today's topic? Let's get started. Hey, I hope you have been enjoying the sunshine if that is, the season that you're going into where you are, because I really am enjoying the sunshine here in the Chicagoland area. Vitamin D is actually great for ADHD brains. I also heard something the other day that I tried and it worked actually. So if you feel like your ADHD meds are wearing off, go for a walk. 10 minutes max, and you'll notice a difference. I promise you. Like, I literally just did this like probably 10 minutes ago, and it worked. It was amazing. I mean, it can't hurt to try, right? So anyways, today we are going to be talking about the mind traps that the ADHDers sometimes let us, or we let them hold us back. And these mind traps I'm referring to are also called thought distortions, aka cognitive distortions. All humans have these, but as ADHDers, we tend to hyperfocus or ruminate on these thought distortions, and it really holds us back in like a lot of different areas of life. We want to believe the thought distortion, or what it is really is our brain is doing its job and does everything and brings all the evidence that the distorted thought is actually true. And depending on the thought, it's usually harmful in one way or another to ourselves, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. So what are cognitive distortions? What is a cognitive distortion? What it is defined as is different types of exaggerated patterns of thoughts that are not based in facts. In simple terms, thought distortions are our brains trying to convince us to believe the negative things about ourselves or the world around us. Or it's trying to convince you of some type of weird magical thinking in order to avoid the negative emotions like toxic positivity and things like that. Cognitive distortions show up in many, many different ways, and they show up for all humans, like I said, but they show up more so for those who are neurodiverse. And this is because people who have neurodiversities tend to have more rigid thinking patterns, and these types of patterns of negative thinking can distort our perceptions of reality just a lot easier than with neurotypical people. In the research, people who are neurodiverse struggle with cognitive distortions and thoughts at a 35% higher rate. Now, my source for this was not super reliable, but it was the only source that I did find that had like a percentage or anything like that. But it does make sense. And it'll be easier for me to kind of point out why as we go through the different types of disordered thinking. Now, I do know before you turn this episode off, I know I did an episode like this before, but I have found new research and more types and different types of distorted thinking patterns that tend to hold us back in life. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Speaking of feeling held back in life, do you believe that you feel that way? Do you feel like you could use a guide, a community, or some coaching to help support you in working with your brain and not fighting against it every day, all day? If the answer is yes, then go sign up for a free coaching consultation in the show notes. I hope to see you over there. And maybe even just join the Patreon. Let's build our ADHD community. If you're listening in real time, anyone who joins, even in the free tier, gets a free download surprise from me that is a paid item in the Patreon until we get to 20 members. I hope to see you over there. Okay, now back to the show. So, as I was saying before, there are so many types of thought or cognitive distortions, and I'm going to try to help you understand each of them so that you can start to identify when they come up for you. Because, as always, the first step to solving any problem is awareness. So, I'm going to go through the 15 different types and what they can look like, and then I'm gonna go through them like in detail. Like, I'm going to list the 15 and then I'm going to go through them one by one in detail. So, the 15 types are catastrophizing, 1, 2, personalization, 3, control fallacies, 4, fallacy of fairness, 5, blaming, 6, shoulding, 7, emotional reasoning, 8, filtering, 9, polarized or black and white thinking, 10, overgeneralization, 11, jumping to conclusions, 12, fallacy of change, 13, global labeling, 14, always being right, and 15, heaven's reward fallacy. So, we're going to go through these, and because there's 15, I did sum it up as best that I could as in little sum it up paragraphs, if you will. So hopefully we can get through this rather quickly and it won't be too long of an episode because I did not plan to make it a part 2. It did come to my mind about halfway through, but I decided I could fit it all into one. So let's get going. 1, catastrophizing. We will start here and then go down the line. So, catastrophizing is when we expect the worst. One bad thing happens, and our minds fill up with those what if questions that are usually quite terrifying. We amp up our anxiety and adrenaline and hyperfocus on those question loops, and sometimes it's really hard to get out of. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if? And usually it has something to do with like death or car accidents or like very big things that we can't control. Number 2 is personalization. This is where a person takes everything that everyone says it does or is perceived to be doing as a direct negative reaction or judgment, and we think about it like that it's always about us. And this is not from like vanity. It's actually kind of a response to being told that we were dramatic too much, etc., or whatever in the beginning of our lives. And it's just something that our brains have a bias towards. Personalization can also look like blaming the self for external events that we had no control over, such as weather, traffic, car accidents, and other things like that. Number 3 is called control fallacy. Control fallacies, those show up when we have like a ton of built up anxiety and overwhelm, and we see ourselves as a very helpless victim of life. And it's all like externally controlled. So we view everything as I can't control, like that we have no control whatsoever over what's going on in our lives. We believe that we are the reason for everyone's unhappiness and we have no control. Again, this can also stem from like a lot of our childhood and young adult life feeling like we didn't have control, especially if you went through it undiagnosed. Number 3 is the fallacy of fairness. Do you ever feel really angry or combative if someone's response to a problem of yours is, well, life's just not fair? I'm getting fired up just thinking about it. See, people who have ADHD have a strong sense of justice. So our fairness meter cannot stand when life is just life, fair or not, even though that's the reality. Our brains love fantasy. Remember, that's a thing. Number 5 is blaming. When we fall into blaming, it's an overgeneralization that can, like, it's other people. They can make us feel, we believe they can make us feel a certain way. When we are actually, like, we are in control of how we feel, but we are going to blame another person. Like, you made me feel sad, so that's why I cried. No, that's blaming. We have control over our own thoughts. Those thoughts can trigger emotions, but it's not the words that are the trigger. It's our emotions about it. We tend to get stuck in fantasy. So just remember to give yourself grace here, because these kinds of thought patterns are really hard to not fall into, especially if you have a negative thought patterned brain in general. So right now we're just becoming aware. That's just a reminder. Number 6 is the shoulds. Now, the way we say this when we're doing something and you say, okay, well, I'm doing this, but I should be doing that. When we believe we have to put the photos in albums because it's what, quote unquote, everyone else does. Or I should do this, I should do that, I should do this, that, or the other thing. Which ends up in a ton of just a pile of shoulds that don't actually need to be done to keep your job or meet your needs. And they're just used as shame against yourself because we judge and shame and should on ourselves. And it feels like crap, okay? So, like, I'm just politely inviting you to please stop doing that, okay? Awesome. All right, so let's move on to number 7. Number 7 is emotional reasoning. This is when we believe that what we feel is factual. So if we feel like we're fat or lazy, then we believe that we are fat or lazy. We must be fat or lazy if we feel like that. If we feel dumb and behind in life, we believe that we are. This is just another way that our brain tries to protect us that is no longer helpful to our brains. It's just another thing that we don't need. And it's another way that our brain it thinks it's protecting us, but it's really not. It's getting in the way and it's causing anxiety. Number 8 is mental or negative filtering. This shows up when we disqualify anything positive and spin it through a negative lens. I won money on that scratch off, but I'm not counting that as much because I stubbed my toe and I dropped a glass and it broke. It's like letting the negative take over the positive. Number 9 is black and white or polarized thinking. This can show up like I'm terrible at everything being the key word. It's a black and white word. It's not gray. It's this or that. Or no one understands, no one being the keywords. And or I'll never get this right, never being the key word. It's a negative mentality with an overgeneralization, like in all the situations, with an overreaction of qualifying all, aka everyone or no one or, things like that. It's usually triggered by a pre-existing negative thought that you already had, and it just kind of builds onto that. So that's, another thing to look out for. Number 10 is, it kind of builds on number 9 with overgeneralization. Excuse me. With this cognitive distortion, we generalize and see patterns based on a single, usually negative, experience. Again, disqualifying any positive and focusing on the negative and making it much less likely for us to try that experience or challenge again. Then there is number 11. We're going right into number 11, which is jumping to conclusions. This cognitive distortion involves mind reading, thinking we know what someone else is thinking and or what they're going to say. Usually we are wrong because we tend to misread their cues and we end up just embarrassing ourselves. Then number 12 is called fallacy of change. This one comes up when we expect others to change when in fact they won't or really just can't change in the ways that we want them to. We feel the need to change people in hopes that we will be accepted if they do change, and in turn, like, we'll all be happier. That's like another magical thinking type of distortion of thinking. Number 13 is called global labeling. Global labeling is another form of overgeneralization, but in specific categories. For example, someone says that, someone else different than the two of you is a loser because they twirl their hair and you also twirl your hair. You may now apply that loser label to yourself because of that one comment that you globally labeled. This is actually called mislabeling, and it happens when it involves describing an event using language that is very emotional and very loaded. So watch the vocabulary when you're kind of describing things. Then there is number 14, and that's always being right. Our brains will go to work to prove that our thoughts and emotions are true, even if there are no facts to prove them true. It's like being wrong is unthinkable, and we will do anything in our power to not be wrong. Last but not least is the heavens reward fallacy. This cognitive distortion comes around when we expect our sacrifices and karma to come back around, like someone is keeping score at life. We feel bitter when the reward doesn't come around. Now that we talked about all the types, let's talk about something we can do about it. You're already doing step 1. You're getting educated, you're learning about it, and you're becoming aware that it exists. Next, your work is becoming stronger at that self-awareness. Practice checking in. Practice being aware of your thoughts and emotions. You can change your thoughts, and I can explain to you how in an exclusive, subscriber-only, Patreon exclusive that I'm going to be posting probably this weekend. So go join now. I hope that you are able to become more aware of how cognitive distortions affect you and how hopefully you can catch them one day maybe even change them. Hey listener, I'd love to hear what you want to hear about. So comment in the box below on Spotify or comment on an Instagram or TikTok ADHD post. What topics do you want to hear? Okay, my friends, that's all I have for now. Stay authentic and we will talk soon.